Brian, you are a passionate member of the Porsche Club of South Africa. I'm also aware that you are probably one of the longest serving members of Porsche Club South Africa.
Yeah, that could quite be so. As I mentioned, I got the first Porsche in '74, and then Porsche factory brought out the turbo. So I turbocharged that car and used to go for morning runs with the motorbikes to the various breakfast venues. And one of them in particular was Staver Lane, which was at Harties, just before where the booms are now. And there used to be 500, 1,000 motorbikes there on a Sunday morning. And we all knew each other very, very well, had breakfast together. And one morning, 4 Porsches rocked up. And they had a look inside, and they saw a long table with people eating breakfast at it, and they would see a breakfast helmet, breakfast no helmet. So they thought, oh, that must be the Porsche driver who came in. And they sat down and began to have their breakfast, and their curiosity got the better of them, and one of them came over and said, how did you know we were here? And I thought that was quite a funny question because I was there first. So anyway, I said to them, no, I usually come here on a Sunday with my friends on the bikes. And that satisfied him, and he went back to breakfast. Then he came back again and said, what car have you got down there? So I said it was a turbocharged 911. I purposely didn't say a factory turbo car. Anyway, he went back to have breakfast, came back another time and said, do you want to drive back with us? And I said, yes, fine. Came back a 4th time and said, can my friend go with you in the car? So they were terribly interested and probably very, very skeptical that there was a turbocharged 911 in the country, other than the one that had been offered for sales in Pretoria by Roy Jeans Motors for 36,000 Rand at that stage. Anyway, so we drove back. I made sure that I was last, and I could see that they were going pretty well and pretty swiftly, and it was still below the speed limit. And I pressed the Super Boost button and gave them a show as to how much power it was, and they were all very staggered. And at the end of the run, they said, wouldn't you like to join the Porsche Club? So that was my start in the Porsche Club, which must have been around 1975, 76, I would say.
Remarkable story, Brian. Brian, you were also part of the first Porsche Club race at Midval.
Oh, yes. That was very interesting. Toby Venter had a 944 Cup car, and none of us had taken note of Toby's success, I think, on motocross bikes. So he had a very good feeling for balance and lines and that. And he'd also, I think by that stage, run a couple of 944 turbo races in Europe. And I qualified quicker than Toby. And I knew his handling and his braking was so much better than the 930 with the rubber suspension and the brakes of the day. And before we started, I said to him, Toby, you go into turn 1 first so that we don't have any argy-bargy. And I remember Toby's eyes went wide and he could not believe it. He'd never had anybody tell him, go in front before. You know, he was so used to fighting his way there. Anyway, so he led into the first corner, and for the first lap or the first 2 laps, and a friend of mine in the crowd said, somebody was muttering, oh, waar's Brian White no? And somebody said, nee, hy sal nou kom. But I saw that Toby was so clever, he wanted to use the braking and the handling of the 944 Cup car to get that far ahead of me that I couldn't get him on the straight, because I was running about 700 horsepower at the time, which was a huge advantage. And on about the fourth lap, I managed to keep that close that I could actually go past him. And then my job was to try and muscle the 930 around the corner so that I could use the power on the straights and stay ahead of him. And at the last noggin we had, Toby even said, yes, Brian White won that race. so that was pretty good.
Brian, you are very well known for building Porsche motors, repairing them, modify them. Tell us a little bit about your experience. Where did it start? What did you do, more or less, to earn the reputation of one of the best Porsche engine builders?
Well, when people saw how quick the turbocharged installation I'd done on my car, they all had to have one. So that started building engines for other people. Excuse me. And one of the interesting things at Tarleton, which showed the speed of the car, was Barry Nell, who was driving a funny car, probably a 7 or 8 second car, which was incredibly quick in those days. And he asked me to take him for a drive on one of the service roads. And he couldn't believe it. He said, this car's quicker than my dragster. But, clearly not true. But on an open road, it feels so quick, and on the track, you're always wanting more speed. So today he is building a number of Porsche engines. So that did very well for Porsche. What was your question?
Tell us a little bit about your experience building engines,
Oh, yes.
modify them.
Yeah. So that went on using the equipment which was available at the time, mechanical injection, trying to get that to understand boost and keep the fueling. And then later on, electronic hot wire fuel injection came about on the 928s. And an American company had developed a system for a V8 which was programmable, where one in those days could not take a 928 and read all the codes and modify it. So I imported that from the States, and then I got my cousin, an electronics engineer. So the electronics engineer then modified the computer so that it would count in sixes for the number of cylinders instead of in eights. And that made it more tunable and more powerful. And then I managed to get the South African agency for the Zytec full engine management system, so that was spark and fuel and everything. And that then really got into the professional side of engine tuning and engine management. When people would want an engine, it was quite important to find out what they actually wanted to do. So one has to assess actually what his requirements are, because if you build him a full race engine, and remember in those days we had no variable camshaft timing and no variable inlet length, so which you've got today, which can give you low end power and top end power. So we could build something that was terribly strong at the top end, but then there would be no low end power. Now, if you build that for a guy who wants to use the car to work and back, he will be totally disappointed because he's just got no power in the traffic. So you had to do a little bit of a almost a psychological study on what he wanted to do with the engine. And I would open a 2-page book, and the one page would be must-have, and the other one would be nice-to-have. So the must-have would be the replacement of any parts which clearly needed replacement. You had to have timing chains, or you had to have chain rails, or you had to have a set of piston rings. And then on the other side, the nice to have would be the turbocharger, the electronic fuel injection, the special camshafts, or whatever it was. And you had to marry those two together to try and give the customer really what he needed, which he might not have realized that he needed. And that made those engine builds pretty successful.
Brian, you also visited very famous racetracks. The Targa Florio comes to mind, Nürburgring, Spa-Francorchamps. Can you share a little bit of your experiences with us?
Yeah, Targa Florio, which means Shield of the Flowers. And I think of the last 17 races, there Porsche won something like 11. And from there comes the name Targa for the one version of the car. So the Targa from Targa Florio is where that name came from. Jeannie and I went to the Targa Florio after it was banned, but reinstated as a whole series of special stages between the towns. So through the town would be liaison, and then out of the town would be a special stage. And there were a number of categories. So the one would be for guys who really wanted to win and get the best times. The next ones would be regularity. So they would nominate what time they would take from beginning to end of each stage. And then the next category was what I called show and tell. And I can remember that one guy had a black Austin Healey 100, and I think he'd hired a blonde girl in brand new white overalls. And as they got to the beginning of the town, the girl would hop out and sit on the mudguard, cross her legs and drive through the town. And the Italians went absolutely bananas when they saw this. And that was more remarkable than seeing the cars going through the mountains. That was the Targa. On
the Green Hell.
The Nürburgring, yes. In the early days when it was much cheaper, then Ziggy Brunn, Dr. Ziggy Brunn, who was a dentist, but got heavily into Porsches, particularly the competition types, the 908s, the 917s, and stuff like that. And we used to hire Nürburgring for ourselves. So there was no booms, there was no gates or marshals. And there's one particular year, about 17 Americans flew over with their cars, and most of them were working for Bill Gates at the time. And they said they weren't paid very well, but they had good bunches of shares. So they probably became millionaires. We're talking in probably in the 80s now. And that was very interesting. The one guy had the latest 993 bi-turbo, so we can get the year from that, and he wanted to be married at the end of the long straight. So they got a minister and they arranged that, and then he asked Ziggy please to take him around and show him how that car could go around Nürburgring. And Ziggy at that time threw the keys of a factory 3.2 RSR, the green one that Theodor Toy purchased. And I was one up in the car, Ziggy was two up, and the car was very, very much lighter and very tuned for the track. And I would drive behind, and I would go to lunch on what Ziggy was doing, so I could line up on the corner perfectly, because he knew Nürburgring like the back of his hand, and I could brake maybe a little bit later than him and get on the gas maybe a little bit earlier. And I didn't realize it, but that got into Ziggy's mind. And when we finished, he said to me, okay, Brian, now we go together in the green car. So I thought, yeah, he's going to show me now. So I threw him the keys and he threw them back, because he wanted to know what the South African knew that he didn't know. But it took two corners before I made a bloody fool of myself, because when you go to Nürburgring the first time, it's just green trees. There is nothing to tell you which way to go. And I've probably done now 50 laps there, and I still don't know where to go. But as we came to this, it was the second or third or fourth corner, whatever, Ziggy would say, no, it's this side, the track is going this way. So I realized then how quick you can be if you follow somebody who really knows the track. And I then used that in later days when I was following Jeff Mortimer, who had been South African saloon car champion down at Aldo Scribanti. And I then remembered that I was following him because he was born down that way and knew the track so well. And I realized, no, that's silly. Stop following him, because you're going to school on everything he does, and then when you go out on your timed run, you actually don't know where you are. So you have to go and practice without going to school on somebody and learn it for yourself. So that was Nürburgring.
Spa.
Hockenheim.
Yeah, Hockenheim.
Hockenheim was very interesting. Somebody had hired the track, and Ziggy had taken along the green car, the 935, the 962, and he said to Jeannie, she was with him, come with me in the green car, the RSR, and a black GT2 was out at the same time. And Jeannie said she can always tell when Ziggy was ready to do something, because he would start wiggling in the seat and getting everything comfortable, and he'd be looking in the mirror. And this GT2 came up behind them, and he couldn't pass Ziggy. And Jeannie said to me afterwards, yeah, we had this race with this black car, and I went and saw what it was afterwards. And she said, it was some rally driver. The rally driver happened to be Walter Roll, who was the test driver for Porsche factory at the time. And when I went to see what car it was, he also had a bi-turbo there, and carpeting in the pits and the whole gedooti there. And the owner was absolutely furious that Walter Roll couldn't get past Ziggy in this RSR, but you had a competition RSR out and out with a very experienced driver against a car that was heavier and two up and whatever. So that was quite interesting.
Amazing story. Spa, Francorchamps.
Yeah, Spa. We had the 962 there. I drove the 962 around Spa, but it's terribly difficult in a wing car. The whole bottom of that car looks like an inverted wing. And the comment that somebody made once is absolutely true, where they say, I cannot go through this corner at 160 k's, but I can go through at 210, because the traction a tire has got is dependent on the downforce that the tire sees. Now, in a normal car, the centrifugal force pushing you outwards on a corner is dependent on mass, and the footprint on the rubber for traction is dependent on mass. So the two of them tend to cancel each other out to a high degree. But when you've got a wing car, your footprint is increased unbelievably, but the mass is not increased. So the sideways force stays static, if you like, but the downforce increases like hell. So if you get up from 100 something k's an hour to 210, your footprint has improved and your cornering has improved majorly, whereas your G loading outwards has not. And during that day, Ziggy's son, who by that stage had won a couple of European championships at all the circuits in Spain, Italy, Brands Hatch, Germany, said to Jeannie, I'll take you around in the 962. And the car which Franz Pretorius imported into this country afterwards. And by the late afternoon, Jeannie said to me, look at my shoulder, look at my hip, look at the side. And it was blue from the G loadings against the side of the car. And, you know, we are lucky if we can corner at maybe 1.2, 1.4 G in our non-wing car tin tops. Whereas in those cars, I mean, they start off at 2.6 G and go higher. And so Jeannie was experienced 2.5, nearly 3 times her own body weight against the side of the car without knowing it and preparing it for it. So that was a remarkable thing at Spa.
Brian, over the years, you had contact with a lot of interesting and famous racing drivers who actually visited you at here at the house that we are now. I'm thinking of Jochen Mas. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
Yeah, Jochen used to love coming and staying here for the 9-hour and 6-hour days, because he said he could lie next to the pool, completely calm, lovely sunny weather, whereas if they stayed at Kyalami Ranch, which was there still in those days, there would be 20 people standing in line asking for signatures and things. So we became very friendly from that point of view. And in return, he gave us his flat in Monte Carlo, which was a second story just above Raskas. And he had that there for tax purposes, so that he had a residence, an email address for tax purposes. And he stayed in, I think, Beaujolais, which is just 2 city blocks above that. So that was remarkable. Reinhold Just has also been here, and he brought with him Henri Pescarolo, who was driving for him at that stage, and he was here. And Henri went on to create his own team driving at Le Mans, so that was quite remarkable. Terry Bootson was also here for one of the Formula One races, just to rest, and we took him to Hartbeespoort Dam, and when he saw the yachts and everything as you pass the snake park, he couldn't believe how much like Europe it was looking down at all the yachts. And Jürgen Barth was here. He was competitions manager at Porsche, also has won Le Mans as a driver. Incredible feat, because one year Porsche had a problem with their motor. They were leading by a long way and they had a problem with the motor. But what I first of all have to explain, that to be regarded as a finisher at Le Mans, one year somebody broke their car, also with a long lead, and they stopped the car before the finish line, and they waited for the 24 hours and the flare to go up, and he pushed the car across the line, and he was given first place. And of course that created a lot of histrionics. So they then changed the law, and they said, no, the car has to go across the line under its own power. And that was okay for about 3 or 4 years, and another car broke down. They also parked it before the line, but they took it across the line on the starter motor. And they were given first prize, but again, a whole lot of rule changes. And they then changed it and said, right, you must go across the line, and your last lap may not be 10% slower than the lap before. So now Porsche is sitting there with a car that's broken, with a major lead, and they got Jürgen Bach to get in the car. They disassembled, they took the plug out of one of the cylinders, and they tried to get the motor so at least it would run. And they said to him, okay, Jürgen, you've got to do 2 slow laps now, so that your last lap is not 10% slower than the lap before. And he actually managed to do that, and Porsche won the race. So that's one of their wins, which is in the total. quite remarkable.
If you think of the movie Le Mans, you obviously think of David Piper. Your association with David?
David came here because of his coming out to the SWAT Corps end of January, 1st February meetings, and he absolutely loved the garage downstairs because he said it looked like an English garage where there was all the pieces you need nearby, not stuck away and hospital clean. So it's sort of a backhanded compliment. But the remarkable thing with David was that it so happened that I had spent a lot of time at Tarleton doing quarter miles, and I knew Mick from Rensburg, the owner of Tarleton, very well. And I said to Mick, listen, I want to bring David Piper, so I want some VIP tickets and to come there, and I want to come and look at your workshop first. And so we went there, and I showed David in the workshop about a 10,000 horsepower jet engine bolted onto a roller skate, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. That motorcycle wheels in the front and huge slicks at the back, and this massive jet motor bolted into it. And he said to me, Brian, we staying here this evening for the meeting? Yes. Will they run this jet car? Yes. This evening? Yes. So we went up into the grandstand and, of course, watched a lot of the quarter mile runs and everything. And then they started up this jet engine. And David Piper could not believe it, because they've got a whole lot of, the Americans call it, we've got a whole lot of side shows built in. So a normal jet engine will run on paraffin or diesel. That's their normal fuel. But on these, they had a huge bunch of injectors that injected gasoline, petrol, into the back. And of course, that would just explode at the back and make a bang that would shake all the dust off the grandstands and everything, and shock people. So David Piper could not believe that. And that was interesting about one of the things of the David Piper visit.